Hey everyone, and welcome to our first live stream of the day. This one will be the presentation from the AirlineSim convention in English. Um, First, a few disclaimers. I'm not quite sure how good the quality of the stream will be. I'm only streaming in regular HD already, but YouTube is already complaining about not receiving enough data, so I don't know what the stream will look like. If you have questions, post them to the chat. I'll look over there every now and then. And if you have any technical issues, sound is too loud or doesn't work or whatever, just please let me know. Uh, this is one of my first live streams using YouTube, so we'll see how it goes. Um, all right, let's get started, I'd say. So, if you couldn't make it to Leipzig to our AirlineSim convention this year, you probably still know roughly what kind of features we announced, and this live stream is basically intended to do two things. First of all, I want to give the presentation again that we did in Leipzig to give a bit more details than what I put on the blog already. And after that, after we talked about the new features, I'm also going to repeat the Q&A session that we did, in which we answered the questions some of you posted on the forums. And I'm pretty sure that we'll have the time to answer some more questions that you can put on. You can ask on the chat. Um, it should be next to the stream on YouTube, and I'm gonna check it every now and then. So yeah, just post your questions. Um, so you already know what the features are that we presented: booking classes and diverse passenger types. Um, and which were the what was the I mean, which problems do we want to address with these features? First of all, we do have some issues affecting demand distribution. So the most commonly reported issue with it is the strong bias in favor of frequency. Every experienced player knows that. You have you basically have a big advantage if you manage to have a lot of flights on a connection. That will give you an edge because the distribution system, the way it works right now, basically allocates passengers according to the um, the relative rating or the rating of a connection relative to the sum of all ratings, which means that if you have hundreds of thousands of connections for a given airport pair, let's say, um, even if the ratings are quite different, it means that all the every flight will receive one passenger more or less until there's no demand left. And the more flights you have in that area, basically in that window where the passengers are distributed, you will get more passengers by having a lot of flights. Um, that's of course related to the flight ratings. Most commonly complained about is the race to the top, I call it. That is that even economy passengers will require an enormous service level, which is very unrealistic. And basically, airlines compete for these economy passengers by offering better and better and better service. And then, last but not least, one thing that I personally find is a big problem is the issue of network control. That means interlining is one of the most important features in AirlineSim. I'd say it's basically one of the most important features that exists in AirlineSim at all when compared to other games. Um, but at the same time, you have really, really little influence on your interlining network. That means um, you can have a contract or you don't, but you don't have any other influence on how passengers book these interlining connections between your airline and your partners. Let me check the situation is right now. No questions so far. Good. So the next question we have to answer is how, generally speaking, how would we want to address these problems? And let's take a quick look at what the goal of AirlineSim is, or what AirlineSim actually wants to be. So if AirlineSim had a mission statement, I don't think we have one. It would be AirlineSim aims to be a realistic simulation in the sense that it is plausible enough to be used in an academic environment while remaining fun as a game. I think I already mentioned this when we introduced the new interface in AirlineSim 6.2, that I want to put more emphasis on the terminology used in AirlineSim. I want AirlineSim to be less an arcade game and more a realistic game in the sense that everything we do in the game does at least have some real what do you call it? It's modeled after a real thing. Even if it's just a terminology, of course there are things that we just can't realistically simulate, but we want them to show up. The reason behind this is that there's universities approaching us every now and then asking whether AirlineSim can be used for teaching purposes. And so far this has never worked out because there's just a few things in AirlineSim that are very unrealistic. Speak of maintenance, for example. So a long-term goal is when we address issues in AirlineSim, if we rebuild features, then we want to do it realistically, but of course it still has to work as a feature in the game. People still have to be able to play the game. So as said, you know the solution, booking classes and diverse passenger types. I'll give you a quick recap what this feature is about. So basically what you have right now is you have service classes, business, economy, first, etc. And the booking classes allow you to specify more than one class per service class. So all in total, you will be able to have up to 26 passenger booking classes, and this is not perfectly realistic. We will have 10 booking classes for cargo. In reality, there isn't really such a thing as booking classes for cargo, but as you all know, the primary focus of AirlineSim lies on passengers. So this is basically just to have it in there, so it, there must be cargo in some way, but we're not putting too much emphasis on it. So basically, you can have more than one booking class per service class, and on this booking class level, you can specify additional settings. For example, you can specify the connection settings, how you want this booking class to be available in terms of connections. So for example, you could say that a certain booking class can only be booked for direct flights or only as an interlining connection, but we'll get to that later. Then availability settings. When is this booking class available for booking? Like how many hours before the flight takes off, for example. Then stuff like cancellation rules, baggage rules, and respective fees, and lots of more stuff that we could put into this in the future. So I basically see this feature as a foundation for many advanced features to come. We'll talk more about this in a minute too. But most importantly, the booking classes themselves, they give you this fine-grained control over the network that I mentioned earlier. That is probably going to be the first and most important benefit of this feature. So next we have the diverse passenger types. That's a bit more abstract, so let me elaborate. The current status quo of AirlineSim is that a service class also is a one-to-one mapping of a passenger type. So for economy class, there is exactly one profile, so to say, of an economy passenger. And basically what we have to do with this model is that every type of economy passenger that exists in reality, so the guy that books Southwest or Ryanair and the relatively wealthy economy passenger that likes to have comfort but is not, you know, wealthy enough to book business class. Um, all these different kinds of passengers basically are mixed in one type right now. So this explains the race to the top phenomenon, because it is really hard, or dare I say impossible, to get a proper booking behavior with this kind of universal economy passenger type. So with the diverse passenger types, we now have the ability to, in theory, define as many passenger types as we want. So we can go ahead and say, okay, this is a Ryanair passenger type, basically, that just looks at the money, doesn't care about service, doesn't care about extra fees for extra bags, doesn't care about the airport that the flight departs from. All these things can now be specified. And on the other hand, um, we can have the direct opposite of that kind of passenger type. And these passenger types even are not bound to service classes anymore. One complaint that we get a lot is that passengers won't book uh, a connection in business class, even if it has better service and a better price than, say, a more expensive and not as high quality economy connection. In theory, the passenger types, the new ones, they will book any connection that matches their criteria. Although there might still be passenger types that will still only book for a certain uh, service class level. For example, I'm pretty sure there are business travel policies in large companies that say no one is allowed to fly a higher service class than business class, for example. So even if the first class offering would be better on paper, these passengers would not be allowed to book these. And there's plenty of examples like that. Then another small feature that had to be added basically as a foundation for a future feature that I would like to have in the game is arbitrary cabins. So I have to explain a bit why we need this. If you fly short or medium haul, typically you will notice on the airplane that there's only one type of seat. And the only difference between business and economy is that there is a curtain between these two classes. The arbitrary cabins allow to do exactly this in AirlineSim. So what it means is you can put one type of seat on an airplane, like an A320 for example, put in 180 identical seats, but then into this physical cabin you can put booking classes for two different service classes. And the idea is that at some point in the future, we will also allow to do this this actual moving curtain, which means this curtain might move to the front or to the back depending on the actual booking situation dynamically. In the first release, when the feature comes out, you will be able to manually adjust this between every booking. So every flight instancing works just the way it used to. So once a flight is booked into the system, you can change it. But for the next iteration, for the next time the flight is booked in, you can adjust the capacities as you see fit, as you would adjust prices nowadays. Then another feature that's new and related to the booking classes and the diverse passenger types is configuration templates. These are exactly this. It's a template that allows you to define certain settings, service profiles, prices, the ratios for booking classes, and stuff like that. And it allows you to do this by specifying certain matching criteria. Matching criteria means that you can specify, for example, a distance range. Any flight between 500 kilometers and 1,500 kilometers should get this template applied when a new flight number is created or when a new airport pair is created. The idea here is that these matching criteria will be extended over time. So initially we'll probably only have distance, and over time I'll add more stuff like origin airport, involved countries. There's probably more things that we can come up with that would work as matching criteria. And I guess it's also this feature would also be useful without the booking classes, but since we now have the booking classes, which introduce a lot more settings than you previously had, and because the amount of settings is only going to grow over time. I mean, we already have like boarding settings and cargo preference and stuff like this. Because of that, I think a feature like this really makes sense. It makes stuff easier to configure. Then we also now finally allow to pick the comfort setting choices when you create an airline. So many people, experienced players primarily, complained about our comfort settings, that they were silly, that these defaults didn't make sense, and they wouldn't want to wouldn't want AirlineSim to set up seating configuration, service profiles, etc. They want to control this stuff by themselves. So what we did now is we added the most important settings to the founding screen. So if you create a new airline, you can pick which default settings you would like to use and which ones you would like to control yourself. Okay, then a few words about implementation. So we basically rewrote the complete ORS. So ORS is, I always say, the heart of AirlineSim. It's our unique feature that allows to generate these connections and actually build an airline network instead of just point-to-point connections. And this whole system has been taken out of AirlineSim into an own external system, basically for performance reasons, because we do a lot of calculations with the new passenger types. So basically, you can imagine that, for example, for a important connect or an important airport pair, like say New York to London, you can always expect the system to generate hundreds of thousands of connections for this one airport pair alone. So, and if you have now, say, 20 passenger types, basically you have to rate these hundreds of thousands of connections 20 times for or you have to rate these hundreds of thousands of connections and sort them and then distribute the passengers. So that's a lot. There's lots of calculations going on, and for this reason, it is now an external service that all the several AirlineSim game worlds basically share one of these systems, and by this we can use more resources on the service. But that's really an implementation detail. What's more important to you as a player is the fact that the new rating system has no relation whatsoever to the existing one anymore. So the old ratings, the bars you see all over the game, they are basically meaningless. There is for this reason we also won't display them in ORS results anymore. And because there are so many different passenger types, it doesn't really make sense to just display them anymore, because that would basically mean that we tell you what passenger types there are and how they book their stuff. So, because that would make it a bit too easy, too transparent, the ratings won't show up anymore. There is now a lot more different rating factors. There's new rating factors, obviously. There's now knockout criteria, which means that certain passenger types will require a certain service level or a certain service criteria to be present. If it is not, the connection is completely out of the question. For example, some business travelers might require that their flight can be refunded, for example, that they can rebook their connection. If your connection doesn't offer that, then you're out basically. Um, Also, the images then will be split in different components. So right now we have one unified image value. In the future, you will have a reliability image and you will have a quality image. The reliability image, of course, makes sense since we've introduced the um, dynamic turnaround times feature where you can actually have delays and stuff like that. Um, Then a few words about the history of this feature. The booking classes and diverse passenger types are actually one of the longest planned features we've had in AirlineSim, I think. So the first idea is to simulate real-world GDS function. Stands for Global Distribution Systems. Came up in 2013 already. And in 2014, we actually in Leipzig, we had a team meeting and this defined a long-term feature roadmap for AirlineSim. So basically, we wrote down all the major feature complexes in AirlineSim that we want to address at some point, and we put them into a rough order in which it would make sense to address these. And this long-term feature roadmap is still in effect today. We follow it, and departure offsets, dynamic turnaround times, and all these things that we've done so far basically have been taken off of that roadmap in their specific order. So in 2015, we had another team meeting where we actually uh, gathered a few external experts to discuss real-world reservation distribution systems to see how these things actually work in reality, what there is to it, all the different aspects that are important, why do these things exist, how do airlines use it, and most importantly, of course, to find a compromise of how can we take these real-world systems and put them into AirlineSim into a meaningful way without being, like, as I said earlier, on the one hand, we want it to be real, we want it to make so much sense that we can use it in an academic environment. On the other hand, we want it to stay a game that can be played by someone who's merely interested in aviation but not an expert. Um, and in late 2015, we finally kicked off development on this feature. And in early this year, we had another team meeting just to discuss the rating system because it's like one of the most important aspects of this and a quite tricky one at that. And yeah, then the president was September. We had the AirlineSim convention in Leipzig and presented the new feature. And from there on out, the idea is to roll out the initial parts. It's probably not going to be one single big release, but the first and most important parts of this new feature should be rolled out in early 2017. The slide still says late 2016, but to be honest, it's almost November. There's 2 months left. There's going to be Christmas. There's other projects we have to work on. So I doubt that it's going to be 2016. But I really hope that we can have the feature out in the first quarter of 2017. And from then on, we will add additional features based on booking classes for quite some time. So we have several planned additions. These are our shortest term additions. Some of them are pre-release actually, so they will put them into the game even before we release this feature. Most importantly, of course, is going to be performance optimizations. There's still a lot of optimizing to do. We need to write in-game help articles about these new features because we're definitely leaving territory where stuff is intuitive. So people will need help understanding these features, and we want to make sure that once the feature is released, there is going to be documentation about it. Then we will see during testing what kind of comfort functions we need to manage the booking classes. As I said, they introduce quite some complexity, and it might be necessary to add additional tools to manage that complexity. Then What I also would like to get in before release is cancellation rules and fees, so that you can specify whether passengers have get a refund when they don't show up. So there's also going to be no-shows and cancellations, of course. You can't ask for fees, but at the same time, or you can not offer refunds, but there's never going to be cancellations. So both sides of this coin have to be implemented. Then what I also would like to get done before release is the connection between the new booking class feature and the dynamic turnaround feature. Most importantly, baggage restrictions. So the point here is that you could, for example, specify in your economy booking classes that you have a maximum amount of bags or maximum weight of bags, which of course would reduce your average baggage load that you have on your flights, which in turn would reduce the turnaround times. So this is, I think, one of the prime examples how these two seemingly independent features are actually interconnected in a way that they are interconnected in the real world. And that's exactly what we want to achieve with these features. And then another thing that I would like to get in is opening and closing booking classes based on booking time. So you can specify basically a time window between 0 and 72 hours before the departure of the flight, when this flight will actually be available for booking. Then we have a few midterm features that we'd like to add. One of them is overbooking, which basically means that you can specify a certain amount by which you want a service class or a booking class to be overbookable. So that means you basically accept more bookings than you actually have capacity available. And you basically hope that there will be enough no-shows or cancellations that in the end you don't have to leave any passengers behind. It might have to be pushed back because we don't have the statistics yet to make sure that this isn't misused. So one thing that comes to mind is you can dramatically overbook booking feeder flights, which will generate passengers for your connections, and then these overbooked passengers actually wouldn't be able to fly in reality, but since our system doesn't know which connection a passenger is booked on, you could misuse this feature. So we'll see. We might have to wait for better statistics to be available to actually implement this feature. Then one thing that I mentioned earlier is nesting, which is the technical term for the moving curtain. So basically nesting in its abstract form only means that a higher booking class, a higher value booking class, can increase in size automatically by using capacity that used to be allocated to lower value booking classes, but not vice versa. So basically what that means is if you have a business booking class and an economy business booking class, if there is very high demand for business, then the business booking class will automatically expand and use capacity that used to be economy, because you can make more money from the business class than you can from the economy class. And then an important part is distribution channels. Actually, this is internally this feature is booking classes, diverse passenger types, and distribution channels. But we decided that it would make sense to have the first two parts shipped as early as possible and then add the distribution channels later. What we mean by distribution channels is that in reality you can't just start accepting bookings like you can in AirlineSim. So there you would have to first get a reservation system, you would have to get an inventory system, you would have to get contracts with travel agents, global distribution systems, stuff like this to actually reach your customer base. And we want to have something like this in AirlineSim eventually, although the concept for this isn't finalized yet. And then there's a few long-term additions. One we would really like to have is booking level statistics, which is really, really hot. So people ask for this on the forums all the time. that they want to see the actual connection. So they want to see where a passenger on a flight actually came from and where they are going to, including the intermediate stops and which flights were part of the connection. This is an enormous amount of data. It is not impossible to do. I think there is, especially nowadays, there are databases that can write that amount of data in a very short time, but it's still quite a technical challenge. Um, and I would like to look into realizing this at some point, because obviously, once we had this data, we could simulate a lot more additional aspects that we haven't had so far. So one thing is, for example, uh, you could do network costing. Network costing means you can actually do a costing based on your network. You can see whether a flight that by itself looks like it's bringing in a loss is actually profitable because it generates passengers for other flights, stuff like that. Or we can add advanced accounting options. So in the reality, accounting is a really big issue when it comes to interlining flights, where who collects the money, who has to pay whom, who collects fees for this service, stuff like that. But that's quite advanced, so we'll see. Then another set of features that many people would like to see is charter and code share. And in theory, the booking class feature will allow us to do this more easily, because we now have a feature in place that allows us to subdivide the capacity of a flight that more or less dynamically. And this, of course, could be used also for features like code share, where you basically you have a booking class that is not your own, but that of a partner airline, for example. But this is quite far out in the future. It's quite a complex feature. Then other things that could be realized based on what we discussed so far is passenger loyalty system. So, for example, for different booking classes, you could specify how many miles a passenger can collect by booking this flight. And we can do some kind of marketing feature that works with the passenger type. So basically, you pick what kind of audience you want to cater to, and tailor your marketing campaigns towards these passenger types, basically. So you're probably wondering what is next on the roadmap. I'm talking about after booking classes and passenger types, and I have to say this hasn't been decided yet, and it will probably take quite some time until development on this stuff starts, because as I said, this feature won't be released before 2017. We also want to add a lot of other stuff. So the earliest we will even think about what we're going to do after the booking classes features is going to be at some team meeting in 2017, probably more like 2018 or 2019. We'll see. Then what are the options? What could we address next? Obviously, there's lots of stuff we can do. One thing that is a personal pain point that I would really like to address is demand generation. So far, as you might know, demand in AirlineSim is quite static. It is based on real-world schedule data, and there's all kinds of drawbacks to this. My primary example of why the system is flawed is Dubai, for example. Dubai does have some origin traffic, but as we all know, the amount of flights that go through Dubai are connection flights. It's such a big hub because it's connecting the world. But if you only look at scheduled data, Dubai looks like it's this huge market that generates so much traffic, and that is quite unrealistic, and we would like to address that. But that is a really hard thing to do, and would require quite a bit of artificial modeling on our side. Part of that would be a switch to destinations instead of airports as the actual origins and destinations. So right now, basically, airports have their own passenger demand, which doesn't make sense. So if you have 3 airports in, say, New York, then these 3 airports more or less compete for the same market. They don't have their own markets. They might have to some extent, but you know what I mean. It's not the airports having the demand, it's the area where they're located. Then what we would like to do at some point is rework ground operations. That means more meaningful ground facilities like terminals. For example, one thing that comes to mind is that your own terminals have a beneficial effect on connection times. Um, we could add stuff like lounges, more ground services in general. So, what kind of amenities do you offer in your at your gates, for example? Is there a driver service that brings your first-class passengers to the airplane in a limo? Stuff like that. There's many things that we haven't even touched yet that we could still put in there. Then what we really need at some point is a new maintenance model. The one we have right now has been around for many years and it is completely unrealistic. It makes no sense. We would really like to put in an actual, more realistic maintenance model. Then we definitely need a replacement for the stock market. Um, I've mentioned on the forums a few times that I would really like to remove the stock market altogether. At the same time, there's a few things that the stock market is needed for that we would have to find a replacement for. For example, mergers and acquisitions are a part of aviation. It's just there has to be some way of buying out competitors, and it would be sad to lose that kind of functionality. At the same time, um, we might want to find a replacement for the functionality that the stock market provides in terms of raising capital. Um, that might be something that we would like to find an alternative feature for, but it's relatively low on the priority list, I'd say. Obviously, that is just the tip of the iceberg. As I said, there's many things that we could address at some point. So, what is our timeline? I've mentioned a few times before that we would like to have this feature in its basic form rolled out in 2017. Until then, we still have to do a lot of stuff, performance tuning. We still have to adjust quite a few existing features to the new structures, like pricing tools and stuff like that. We also want to still add the features that I mentioned earlier, and there has to be a lot of balancing done. Balancing. It's basically what it says on the slide. This feature is very complex. We have, as I said, in theory, unlimited amount of passenger types, and getting this to work right, maybe not to work right, but to feel right, most importantly, is probably going to take some time. And it's really hard to tell how much time, really. So, yeah, that is more or less the timeline. Um, what I can say is that, or at least what I plan is for the development process to be more open from now on. I mean, we basically developed this feature in silent mode. Didn't leak any information about it because for a long time we didn't really know whether this feature would actually be feasible, whether we would be able to realize it. Now that it's out in the open, I plan on doing more development logbook entries, to maybe development live streams again. Just in general, provide more information about what we're doing. So what you might be wondering right now, beyond the timeline itself, is how are we going to release this feature? Is it going to be 6.4, which means it's a new feature that will be installed on existing game worlds, or is it going to be 7.0, which means no backwards compatibility, it's a hard word, which means that, or which would mean that we would start new game worlds with this feature, but old game worlds would not receive it. Technically speaking, these new features are AirlineSim 6.4 because we can install it on existing game worlds. It's technically possible to do so. In practice, I dare say it's more like a 7.0, because it will completely change the booking behavior. It will change the character of the game as a whole, I'd say. And we cannot use the modular approach as we did it with dynamic turnaround times. As you might know, the dynamic turnaround times, we can install that version 6.3 on all game worlds, but only selectively enable these new features. This is not possible with the booking classes because the changes needed to realize that are so deep that either you activate it or you don't. There's no middle ground. Obviously, this leads us into a big dilemma because if we use the 6.4 approach, it will definitely be a massive disturbance to existing airlines. We can't tell to what extent or how bad it would be, whether it would be bad at all. But if the feature wouldn't change anything, it would be kind of pointless to build it in the first place. So we have to expect that there's going to be some changes. And if we would go the 7.0 approach, that would essentially mean an end of life for all existing game worlds because we don't have the resources to maintain two major branches of AirlineSim over time. So as you might know, I'm the only developer of this game, and having two separate versions of the game is a lot of work because basically if you patch one thing on one game world, you have to patch it again, not a game world, in one version, you have to patch it again in another version. If you're lucky, you can just copy over the changes. If not, then due to the changed structure of the versions, you basically have to do the same work twice. And this is not feasible in the long run. It's impossible to do for us. So neither of these options is ideal, I'd say, but I tend to say that it's going to be the 7.0 approach. Although how it will be done exactly, how much time it will leave for players to prepare, we don't know yet. And we will do real life or real data tests, taking data from actual game worlds, copying them over to another server, applying the changes, and see how the system reacts to get a feel for what players have to expect. Yeah, that is basically it concerning the booking class features. I'm just going to wait for questions now. I'm gonna keep an eye on the chat to see if there are any questions coming in. And once we're done with these, I will go on and we do the Q&A where I answer questions that have been previously asked on the forums before the convention. Okay, I take it there's no questions. I'm not quite sure how long the delay is between what I say and when you see it. But so if there's no questions by now, then I'll just continue. And if you have any questions later on, just post them to the chat and we'll get to them. So on to Q&A. One question that we received on, or we constantly receive on the forums basically is the question about long-term servers. So there's two questions. What's going to happen to the existing long-term servers? And there's a question, is there going to be new long-term servers? So before we discuss this, I want to present this quick chart which basically shows you the amount of active players. And the arrows tell you where we started new game worlds, in this case Quimby 4 and Otto 1. And as you can see, we basically rely on these new game worlds to get our active player numbers on a higher level again. Otherwise, we would have a slow but very steady long-term decline in player numbers, so we need to have new game worlds. But of course, there will be new long-term game worlds. That's just the, I would say, most popular way to play AirlineSim. And what we have to keep in mind is that we have to be a bit more cautious than in the past. So in the past, we were really freely opened new unlimited game worlds, and what that means nowadays is obvious that we have these many game worlds, more than 10 actually, that have very low player numbers, but from a technical point of view, they generate the same amount of load to our servers than a game world with, say, 1,000 players on there, because the thing that generates the computing load is the networks. It's the ORS. And if you have an old, mature game world with very few players, we actually have very, very, very high loads on these servers because the networks are so big, they're so complex, there's so many connections possible. So we really have to make sure that we don't have too many of these, because we want to have indefinite game worlds. We don't want to shut down game worlds. And to be really honest, indefinite in this case means that as long as they contribute to the result. So if a game world still makes more money than it costs to run the servers, we tend to leave it running. Once game worlds actually fall below that threshold, it doesn't make any sense for us to continue running these game worlds. We have to be honest about that. Once that happens, we will have to close down even long-term servers. Rest assured, none of the game worlds we have right now is close to that. I haven't done the math in a while, but I'm pretty sure that it's going to be another few years. For future long-term servers, we might actually add a guaranteed runtime criteria, which says something like, okay, we guarantee this game world to run for, say, 8 or 10 years. Mind you that none of the game worlds we have right now has been running for 10 years. It's going to be 10 years next year, but we haven't reached that 10-year mark yet. Yeah, and I hope that answers the question about long-term servers. So yes, there will be long-term servers, but probably not as often as in the past, as you've already noticed. We'll probably not start one every year. It's probably going to be a bit less than that, but really it depends. It also depends a bit on the schedule of new features. So when we have a big new feature like the booking classes, it's pretty much guaranteed that we're going to start a new long-term game world. So now there's been questions, I think, on the chat. Let me see. I would like to know if here is any way to implement templates in a pre-release format to all game worlds with current non-booking class settings such as pricing margins, distance, service. Obviously, yes, that would be possible, but it would be a total waste of time, so we're not going to do that. Then another question. I think development should be made to the fullest and thereby go for 7.0. All right, I'll keep that opinion in mind. Yeah, we'll see. Okay, next question from the forums. Business jets and very small aircraft, what about them? With the current demand model, the current ORS, these things don't work at all because we can't really model this fine-grained, basically one-person demands that you usually have with a business jet. With the booking classes and diverse passenger types, we might actually be able to do this. We might be able to define a BizJet passenger type that really cares so much about the quality of the connection that it would be a business jet would be the best fit, contrary to say a first class ticket. But looking at the real world, the business jet business is essentially a very specific kind of charter business. So you don't book. Usually there is no regular scheduled business jet service. It wouldn't be a business jet service if it was scheduled. So it might be something that comes into the game with the charter feature. But as I said earlier, this is quite long down the line. So there's more questions. Plates04 asks, will baggage charges be a part of the booking classes passenger types? As said earlier, yes, that's planned. It's something that we want to do in combination with the dynamic turnaround times. So basically your baggage charges and the amount of bags and your weight settings will have an influence on how much luggage you have to transport, and thereby has an influence on your turnaround times. So yes. Okay, next Q&A question from the forums. Slot blocking, any plans? So slot blocking has been an issue for all time, ever since AirlineSim existed, and ever since AirlineSim had limited slots, and slot blocking has been an issue that has been wildly discussed on the forums and anywhere else where we meet people. So one suggestion that comes up a lot is expand the slot window from 5 minutes to say an hour. The problem with that is it doesn't change the situation. It delays the problem. It delays the effect of the problem. Because then you have 24 windows per day that get filled or get blocked. And once that happens, you have the same problem. And I argue possibly even less scheduling flexibility than you do with a 5-minute window. The new booking system or the new ORS will hopefully address the high frequency issue. So it might take out the incentive to have lots and lots of connections on the same segment, which should free up some slots. And in fact, with the current booking system, with the passenger types are defined right now, there's also there's no incentive, or actually the way it works right now is that airlines and AirlineSim compete mostly for slots. They don't even compete for the passengers, because there's always more capacity than there are, or there's more passengers than there is actually capacity. And we hope that with the changes in the booking system, this situation changes and people cannot afford to, or they have to use larger airplanes, and so the overall amount of flights will decrease, which means more slots for everyone. And besides that, there is not too much we can do about this. Either we have that limited resources of slots, or we don't. And we definitely want to have it. There's all kinds of suggestions that we could make them, that we could put complex allocation systems on top, which would make it extremely hard for new players to find into the game and to actually get slots to get started. So the most likely thing that we might do at some point is some kind of fee structure that encourages new players and is a bit more expensive for existing players. But this is really, I mean, it's not very realistic, and it might be effective from a game design point of view, but we will probably continue discussing this topic for a long time to come, and there is not an easy solution to it. All right. New features on all game worlds. We discussed this before in terms of 6.3 versus 6.4 versus 7.0. It's basically the same thing. It reduces maintenance work for us drastically. It means is a disturbance for existing players. There's a pro and there's a con to this whole topic. We will always try to roll out features to all game worlds, but it's going to be feature specific. I mean, the dynamic turnarounds, for example, we have to, so far we haven't rolled it out to other game worlds because we don't see the benefit in doing so at this point. But for example, what would be something worth thinking about, I'm not saying it's decided or anything, but worth thinking about would be that once we roll out 7.0, or the new booking classes features, that we actually use that opportunity when we have to disturb existing airlines anyway. Uh, let's get it over with and apply all the new features that have been withheld from old game worlds and apply them at the same time. So if people have to adjust their schedules, for example, due to the new booking behavior anyway, um, would save them a lot of work if they can at the same time adjust to, say, dynamic turnaround times. But as I said, there is no decision made in that respect yet, and we'll see how we go about it. Then someone complained about there's too many 737s crossing the Atlantic in AirlineSim. I wasn't really aware of that issue. I'm not quite sure whether it actually is an issue. I can just say that much, that a new performance system is in the works, although with no timeline, because it's volunteers doing it for us, and it's volunteers. I'm not going to push them. So that might reduce that problem, because with a more realistic performance system, it might not be viable to operate certain types on these transatlantic connections. Then the thing about these connections and why they seem unrealistic, I'd say, is that you don't usually see them in reality, and that is a problem of cost structures. It's not a technical problem of the aircraft not being capable of flying these connections. It's about not making sense financially in the real world. So flying a 737 all business, maybe on certain relations. Flying it economy probably doesn't make sense. Really depends on the particular case. But over time, when cost structures in airlines have become more realistic, combined with a performance system and possibly several other features, problems like these will go away. The better the models in airlines become, the more realistic the outcome will be. At least that's what we hope. Next question was about hub expansion, new terminals and runways. So will players ever be able to build new runways? Probably not. I mean, I'm all for dynamic simulations, and it would be fascinating to see what would happen if we had an empty globe and people could place airports wherever they wanted. That would be one extreme, but to be honest, in airline sim we don't want that. It's an airline simulation. It's not about the infrastructure. One part or a component of the appeal of airline sim is that you have to work with what you got, with limited resources, and adding new runways, thereby increasing the physical capacity of airports, would take some of that out, I think, personally. Terminals I talked about earlier. We do have a restructuring of the ground structure feature on the roadmap for some time eventually, but without any timeline, so there might be something coming there. And then a sub-question on the forum was whether you will ever be able to sell terminals, and to be really honest here, I don't really want to do this. First of all, trading terminals is it's a very uncommon thing, I would say. I mean, how often do terminals actually change hands in reality? It's not something like a vivid market where there's trading going on all the time. And as we know from many years of airline sim experience, is that free markets really don't work very well in airline sim. Even on the aircraft market, and I mean, it's a game about aircraft, but even there we don't have the market activity necessary to have actual to actually get real market prices for aircraft. So in the terms of terminals, it wouldn't work at all. So we will not invest any time in doing that, I think. If you build terminals, you really know what you're getting into. All right, and that's been it. That has been all the questions that have been posted to the forums. I'm gonna wait around here for a few more minutes. If you have any more questions, then please tell me on the chat. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope this could shed a bit more light and a few more details about what we have planned, what we've been working on. And it's not quite the same thing as being there at the convention, but um, I hope it gave you at least some insights. All right, so I'm just gonna wait here for any more questions. I think by now the delay should have passed. So I'm going to quit the stream now, and of course, if any questions come up later, please feel free to contact us on the forums or just send an email to support, and we will try to answer it as good as possible. So once again, thanks for joining in, and see you next time, I guess.